Alright everybody, welcome back to the Dayton and Troy Electric Railway. This is episode number 6, and today we're going to continue working our way around the model, out of Tippecanoe City and heading towards Troy. And I know when I started this series I said that these episodes were going to be a little bit shorter and faster for me to do and blah 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 blah. That's not the case today. I wanted to cover a lot of ground and kind of finish off this whole length from Tippecanoe City to Troy and even down to the peninsula. And I'm doing that because I want to finish this series in a certain number of episodes. I'm aiming for 8 episodes. As of this recording, I am hitting that mark. So it's working out pretty decently, but we're going to cover a lot of ground today. And at this point in the series, I've now been able to take into account all of the feedback I've been getting from the previous 5 episodes from you guys, and recommendations for assets and things that I should do differently, and now I can start actually implementing them. The first 5 episodes were pre-recorded months and months ago, and then these last 3 I pre-recorded again, but after the fact, and I'm doing the voiceover work in this like later on. It's all really kind of confusing, even for me, because I've recorded some of this stuff like a long time ago, and I'm trying to keep track in my head of what exactly I'm doing and what I was thinking when I was doing these builds. But anyway, so right here we're working on the outskirts of Tippecanoe City, and another depot was listed here. So I'm trying to mix up what depot assets that I've chosen. There's several along the line, pretty much at every double track sort of siding. There happens to be another depot. So I'm trying to pick different depots for each area just to add a little diversity. I think maybe in real life they might have followed the same like build pattern or used the same architect or something like that. So they just would have been cookie cuttered so they can put them up really quickly. But for the purposes of this build, I wanted to kind of mix things up just a little bit. And it gave me a good opportunity to actually explore some stuff on the download station and search around for some other depots and some other stuff that I was lucky enough to find some other cool things that I can use later on in the process. So that was kind of beneficial. So in this corner here, trying to work out exactly what I'm gonna put here. With these model railroad builds, you kind of end up with some weird negative space sometimes where the fascia, you can't curve it properly, or it doesn't really fit the same way that it shows in the magazine. So you get some dead space in some places, and we're going to encounter that quite a bit actually in the next few episodes in a few areas, especially once I start laying down the fascia and cutting out the ground with the dig holes and stuff like that. We end up with a lot of like weird negative space that's got to be filled either with scenery or some little scenes and stuff like that. So in that area, I had chose to just make some kind of a parking lot next to the industrial facilities there. It's kind of my go-to to fill up some space when I'm not really too sure what to put there. A nice storage facility, storage lot or something like that for trucks and deliveries and things like that tends to work out pretty nicely. So in this section here, we are continuing down. This is known as Boones Hill, and it just seems like it's kind of a stretch of scenic to track through the countryside. We've got this overpass here, which is labeled as the Big 4 Viaduct, and I kind of wasn't sure if I should include this as a design element or not, just because it's not connected to anything, and it's just kind of a freestanding, free-floating double track bridge. But you know, I put it in there, and I actually think that it kind of works. I think I have some shots of it in the cinematics at the end, but it does work. It brings the scene kind of together, and I guess gives it some kind of sense of location and stuff like that. I'm not even familiar with who the Big 4 was in terms of railroading, so I don't know what kind of locomotives and stuff you could put up there. I think I just put a generic steam locomotive up there towards the end for the cinematics for looks, and it works. But just trying to go through here and fill in the scenery. And the thing with these model railroad builds is I start to feel really kind of like, it just starts to feel repetitive. I'm using a lot of the same assets over and over again, and I try to avoid like getting stuck in these patterns where I'm just like, okay, let me just use these trees and then kind of spam down some grass and mix some things up this way and that way. I like to keep things interesting, and certain times, like along the main line where I'm just kind of plopping down a whole bunch of repetitive grass and trees, I'm just like, oh man, this is like the same thing. I've already done this before. I don't know how interesting this is going to be. But it usually ends up kind of coming together. I try using, well, I guess lately I've been using these grass splines just because they fit the area, they fill the area nicely, they conform to the terrain, and then I sprinkle in the actual grass asset, the non-terrain conforming asset, just to kind of add a little diversity to it. And it's been working out pretty nicely, and bringing in some of those shrubs and trees and stuff like that. I still wish that the TB shrubs were a little bit smaller, so we had a smaller variety, but I also haven't checked the download station to see if maybe that those were updated at any point recently, so maybe there are some smaller ones by now, but and I need to look into it. But right now the shrubs are just way too big, but they work and they look good. And I think I've pretty much settled on a palette of trees at this point. I'm not mixing them up too much. I think I've got about 5 varieties of trees that I'm kind of putting down repetitively, in trying to mix them up so that they don't look cookie cuttered, but it is the same palette of trees. And one thing that I do like is that they change size when you kind of move them around. And this is one of the recommendations right here from that I saw in the comments. Somebody had said that even back in the days here, during this time, we might still be seeing some horse and buggy traffic. So I thought that would be kind of cool to work in here, and I do include it in some future scenes. And at the end, I'm going to go back and kind of work it into some of the first scenes that we did in the beginning of the series, so that there's a little bit more of a cohesive continuity to the assets used in the scenes and stuff like that. But I like the idea of adding these horse and buggies. I found a few of them on the download station, and I'm trying to fill them up with some assets to make it look like they're picking up or dropping off some commodities, maybe some fruits and vegetables, beer, stuff like that, whatever would be delivered via freight railroad cars. So, and maybe brought back to the little communities that are just off the tracks there. So I think that's a nice little touch. So now we're moving on to Troy, the hallmark name of the Dayton and Troy, but not the end of the line, which I find kind of interesting. The very end of this is Pequa, but it is the Dayton and Troy, which I just kind of noticed that when I was looking at the map and just started recording this. I was like, oh, we're going into Troy, but we're not at the end of the line. There's still another town to go. So Troy is another sort of downtown city, and it kind of works its way into, let's see, heading out to Pequa. It becomes more rural again, and then we get into Pequa, which is another sort of city scene. So what I'm trying to do again is outline where the roads are going to be, because a lot of the Dayton and Troy was street trackage. Unfortunately, which you'll see towards the end, and I'm already going to be talking ahead of myself here when I say this, unfortunately I couldn't pull it off in some areas. I couldn't pull off the street running in some areas. And I'll talk about that when I get there, but a lot of it had to do with conforming to the terrain and that sort of thing, limitations of the game. So in the downtown area, in the actual city, I kept the street running because I think that that's really important. That's a beautiful design element there. But heading down this peninsula here, it was supposed to be street running, and I tried my best to make it work and work it in, but it didn't quite look right in this game. So I did end up just nixing that. But let's see, working in the Troy area again, going back to these JR buildings. Jay Citron on the forums recommended these little storefronts to me, and I can't remember the names, so if you need to pause the video and look at the names and the codes, definitely do that. They're basically these little assets that are just sort of like partial storefronts that you can clip into other buildings to just have a different sort of facade to them. And I think this is a really neat idea because I'm all about sort of kit bashing things and clipping buildings into other buildings to make totally different looking assets or stacking them or anything like that. If you guys have been following me long enough, you know that I'm totally into that kind of stuff. So these little storefronts help add a lot of diversity to sort of street level scenes when you've been using the same downtown building assets like I have been using over and over again. You can add a little bit of variety to them by changing the storefront, which is really nice. So moving along into, I'm going to call this the eastern side of Troy, again going with the west-east sort of theme that I was talking about in the last episode. I think that was the last episode at least. This is another sort of design modification I had to make here. According to the track plan, right here in this location was supposed to be the Miami and Erie Canal. Miami River, I'm assuming, and Erie Canal. I wanted to work that into this area because I know that it's sort of a landmark sort of river, I guess, in the area. But working it in, I tried doing it off camera before I started recording, and just the way that the track is laid out, and the depth of the scene, and the way Trainz is, and that sort of thing, it just didn't seem possible to me, so I decided to just leave it out. Unfortunately, we'll have to pretend that it is just out of the scene, just out of the way somewhere. And instead, I put in its place this church, which we will be detailing in a moment. I think at this point, it looks like I'm just trying to bring in the background scene here so that I have a little bit of depth to kind of gauge where my scene needs to be, how deep it needs to go, and that sort of thing. And I like curving the backdrop. I think it looks a lot better than when you come at it and make it into like a right angle. This is common among actual model railroading, and it's sort of hit and miss in Trainz because the way that the spline stretches out, if you look, you can see the clouds are a little bit bunched together because they're very, very short spline points there. But the effect is good when you can curve it. It helps the scene feel a little bit deeper than it actually is. And at this point, again, I'm trying to hide where the track goes into the backdrop and goes into staging. And I'm using my overpass trick there, which I ended up just doing off camera because it just ended up being a real pain. Took me a little bit to decide what kind of road to use and how I was going to work it in. But we'll see that in a minute. Now we're back at these little storefronts here, and again, I'm just trying to add some diversity. I think one of them was a bar, there was a post office, this is a barber shop. I don't know what that storefront is there, but these are all really cool. They're a little bit difficult to work into certain assets because of the depth of the doors. I found that the actual asset will kind of like clip into it, so you have to be really careful and conscious of like how you position it and how you clip it in, because certain elements might not clip the way that you want them to or clip the way that you expect, so you have to maybe move it out a little tiny bit or something along those lines. You just have to just pay attention to what you're doing when you start using those. So yeah, back to the church here. So I thought it'd be kind of nice, a nice design element here to add this church and add a little graveyard in the back there. I don't know why, that just felt like something that I needed to bring into here. You know, this is supposed to be like the 1920s, 1930s. I feel like churches were probably much more frequent. They were all over the place really back in the day. And I hadn't put any down yet so far, and I thought that this was a pretty good spot to put it. And I like the scene, how it turned out with just a couple of gravestones in the back, and this church that is just quickly being surrounded by this downtown scene, and being taken over by, I don't want to say gentrification, but like zoning, and you know, things are changing. You know, maybe that church was all by itself at one point. It was just a countryside church, but now the city is creeping in. I don't know. That's just what I picture in my head, and as the lore, as the backstory. So now this area is not labeled on the map. I'm just gonna call it the Troy suburbs. Right through this area, this is what I was talking about earlier, where it was supposed to be street running, and I tried really hard to make it work. But the biggest problem with this is that it's downhill. It's a downward gradient. I think it's like a 2% grade or something like that. It's a pretty steep grade. And it just didn't look right to me. Like, I tried using these road stripes to define like the edges of the road, and it just didn't look right. And part of the reason, I think, is that these road stripes weren't really used back then. They didn't really put down road markings, I don't believe, until post-World War II. And there was really no other way, in my opinion, to define like where the edge of the road was and what is a road and what's not. So instead, I decided to just nix that idea, put the road next to the train tracks, and use one of these JR, I don't know, whatever this name of this asset is, the JR roads, and just put it right next to it. And I think the effect is still there. It actually looks really cool, I think, to see the tracks like right next to the road. And then at the end of the peninsula, there's a crossing there, which I think works. I think it looks pretty nice. And here's another one of these sort of like dead spaces that you end up with these model railroads, that there's a little bit of a gap here. I thought it'd be nice to just fill it in with some more trees, and I think I added some extra details in there, some people that I don't remember if I did it on camera or not, but I did add some people like kind of playing back there, like some kids playing soccer or something like that, which I think is nice. But it's really interesting to try to blend these elements together because we're rapidly going from scenic areas like to countryside into downtown city areas and then back and forth and back and forth. So it's a little bit difficult, in my opinion, to blend it together in a good cohesive manner. Like, it's not impossible, but given the amount of space that you have, and these speed trees aren't very good for like dense foresting or anything like that. So it makes it a little bit challenging. So now we're getting into the detail aspect here. I did spend a lot of time, I think I did. I did spend a lot of time detailing this. I just don't remember how much of it I recorded, but I did add a lot of details here. Right now I'm working in these gas lights, which I think are really cool. Unfortunately, I checked them at nighttime and they don't actually illuminate, which, I mean, whatever. This game, the lighting is so bad that who cares anyway, but I thought it'd be cool to add them in. I think during the daytime, they're a really nice visual element, and I just eyeballed them. Don't kill me. I didn't measure out. I didn't count out those tiles on the sidewalk or anything like that and do like every 20 tiles or something. It was just, I eyeballed it. Wherever they looked good, I tried to keep it even. I put them down. But working in some people here, I think the people really have been bringing this whole thing to life. The one thing that I don't like is that I'm mixing these like still people who are like frozen in action while they're walking, along with these animated people who are in fact like walking up and down the sidewalk. So that is a little bit weird. I kind of wish there was more animated people, and maybe there are, and I'm just not finding them. But it'd be really cool to just have lots and lots of people in all of these little cities and make it feel really busy and like a real bustling city. But maybe I can come back at some point and do that. I'm sure over time we're gonna get more and more animated people because it's just really nice to have that sort of stuff in this game. Back to the horse and buggies, which I think are really cool, especially to see that kind of mixed with some of the older cars and things like that. I definitely think that makes a lot of sense. And I think here I'm just bringing in some more cargo and things like that. One of you guys in the comments had mentioned that there'd be a lot of foot deliveries and a lot of these sort of like fruit vendors or vegetable vendors and just different vendors kind of happening on the street, deliveries happening like all over the place via the horse and carriage or trucks, stuff like that. There was a good variety of it. But that is going to do it for today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you leave a comment and hit that like button, and please subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And I'll see you guys in episode number 7.